I'm going to tell a story by Jonathan Stone, Mailman, published in 2016. Through rain, snow, sleet, hail, and gloom of night, through cutbacks, post office closings and reorgs, through truck breakdowns, post office shootings and the holiday rush, through the rise of FedEx and UPS, through the days, weeks, months, and years, George Waite has delivered mail. 35 years now. Not only that, he's delivered mail for all these years to the same neighborhood. He knows these people and they know him. He loves being a mailman. He loves the routine and the predictability. He loves how even today, with the internet and smartphones, people still look forward to their mail, to the surprise and excitement of good news or bad. The unspoken little secret of being a mailman was that he knew their mail. After 35 years, George pretty much knew who was getting what, who had which banks and which brokerage accounts. He knew where their kids and parents lived by the birthday cards and letters. He knew the good news and the bad news of the households by the envelopes for condolence cards or colorful birthday cards. He knew the acceptance and rejection letters from colleges, even the paycheck stubs from employers. He saw the legal-sized documents that required signatures for real estate closings, divorces, and wills. You couldn't help knowing. You had to sort all of it. You couldn't help seeing who was getting what. George had seen many of the residents grow old with him. He had watched their kids grow up. Tricycles to training wheels to sleek racing bikes to reckless teenage drivers swerving past his truck. The neighborhood was changing, and yet in so many ways it was still the same. Then the Muscovitos moved in, and then, by God, there was change. No one ever saw any of them. The doorbell was rung, casseroles and cookies were left on the front steps, but no thank you notes and no acknowledgments came. People asked George if he had seen the new neighbors. He shook his head and replied, nope. Then came the stone walls with elaborate fencing, 9 feet high, 3 feet over code. Offhand grumbling to George from the neighbors, construction vehicles with crews of construction workers. George caught wind of some neighborhood debate about filing formal complaints about the height violation. But it was the man's own property, of course, and no one wanted to spend money on a legal battle. And it was, after all, an aesthetic judgment. So they resorted to more grumbling. Very mysterious, all this construction, very annoying. Of course, George knew more than the neighbors, but he couldn't share what he knew. He respected the privacy of the U.S. mail. But almost immediately, Alberto Muscovito had piles of mail. Yes, piles of mail, but no personal mail. Contracts from firms George had never heard of. Legal documents from law firms in the Cayman Islands, and outfits in New Zealand and Malaysia and Micronesia. George noticed that the numerous legal and financial documents required no signatures. Signatures which would have required that George meet Mr. Muscovito in person. Even though he shouldn't have, even though he came dangerously close to violating the privacy of the U.S. mail, George gave in to his own curiosity. He jotted down the names of a couple of the firms. Then he Googled them. He was surprised, and then again, not surprised at all by what he found. Firms with numerous ethics violations, fraud warnings from various business and trade associations, warnings from an international watchdog group, and in some cases, no website and no contact information. No evidence of existence beyond an address on an envelope. An address which was just a post office box on an island overseas. After the walls and the fencing came satellite dishes, unmarked vans pulling in at night, parking there for a few hours, then pulling out. The annoyance of the neighbors shifts into high gear with a hammering and drilling at 2 in the morning. And by the time a neighbor frets and fumes and finally calls the police, the noise has stopped. The police do nothing. And finally, an electric locking gate and a large locking mailbox with a narrow tamper-proof slot for mail, built like a strongbox, a stark contrast to the cheap, rickety mailboxes along the rest of the lane. George finds it more and more difficult to curb his curiosity. So he starts small and moves quickly. He slips the next Cayman's document out of its envelope, snaps a shot of each of its 8 pages with his iPhone, slips the document back in the envelope, and reseals it. All postal carriers know how to reseal. They carry special glue in the truck for items that have opened in transit. It takes less than 20 seconds. If you see him in his truck, it looks like he's sorting mail. He prints the photos at home. Overseas account statements, offshore investments, no doubt unreported and untaxed, clearly illegal, right there in black and white. You didn't have to be a genius to see it. The only thing more clearly illegal, opening someone's mail. So this evidence can be officially used exactly nowhere, revealed to no one. It serves as evidence only to George. He's not really sure why he's doing this. After all, he is approaching mandatory retirement with full benefits at the end of the year. Not something he can afford to jeopardize with illegal behavior. But George feels sympathy for the neighbors he has grown to love, the neighbors who have grown to love him. He feels their frustration. It's not just their neighborhood, it's his neighborhood too. One option, he could simply stop delivering the Muscovito mail, just kind of lose it. But then what? The disappearing mail would ultimately trace back to the U.S. Postal Service and ultimately to George. No, that would achieve nothing except temporary mischief and permanent dismissal. What if Muscovito were to begin receiving contracts where the details of the deal were different, or the terms were slightly altered? Certainly that would infuriate Muscovito and sow seeds of mistrust. Or what if the return documents sent back by Muscovito had different terms? What if the agreements had been altered, the documents had been changed, retyped, forged? As if Muscovito were trying to slip in more favorable terms for himself. When his overseas business partners found the changes, they would certainly not be pleased about it. They could hardly keep doing business with someone so capricious. That kind of elaborate forgery and fraud would not originate with a meek veteran mailman on his daily rounds. It would be too involved. Too outrageous for that. Fraud like that would come from a long-time practitioner, such as Muscovito himself, finally going a little too far. George's tampering only feeds his curiosity. He's no longer simply sliding documents out of and back into their envelopes. Now he's looking into everything, reading through all of it, really getting to know Muscovito's businesses. Lots of overlapping bank accounts, shell companies inside shell companies. George sees some elaborate schemes, such as a land purchase for what at first seems to be an Indonesian atoll in the Pacific. With the help of Google Maps and GPS coordinates, George ascertains that there is no such atoll, no corresponding piece of geography. And the money for that purchase comes in part from a wire transfer out of a bank account in Uruguay. George digs further and finds that there is no such bank. So, a transfer from a bank that doesn't exist to buy land that doesn't exist, laundering the money twice, making it squeaky clean for some further expenditure. Eventually, George takes the next big step. He begins retyping and altering the terms of the contracts and forging the signatures. He works on the documents late at night, retyping and spell-checking them on his old Dell desktop, downloading font libraries so he can match typefaces perfectly, choosing printing paper that matches the weight and color of the originals, getting the appropriate international stamps and markings, which proves to be easy for a postal employee. He's been living alone in the little ranch house since Maggie's passing 3 years ago. All of the retirement magazines recommend a hobby, and now he's found one. Something to focus his mental energy. He can take only a day with each document, so that Muscovito still receives it in a timely manner. One day, as he's delivering the Muscovito mail, the electric gate opens. A voice comes over a speaker built into the gate. "Can you bring the mail in today? I want to ask you something." George's heart accelerates. Does he know? Does Muscovito know? George imagines himself backing the truck out, screeching the rubber tires, racing down the familiar lane, and disappearing into a new life. But George is George, with the mailman's temperament. So he drives his bright, cheerful mail truck obediently through Muscovito's front gate and up the drive. Muscovito is standing there in the driveway, ready to meet him. Squat, thick, black hair, big, fleshy arms folded across his considerable chest and stomach. George stops the truck, grabs the pile of Muscovito's mail, and holds it out to him. George does all of this with a friendly smile. The smile is not returned. Muscovito speaks with no greeting and no niceties. "I've got a question." George replies, "Yes, sir?" "Could anyone be tampering with my mail at any point in the process?" George is tentative. "When you say tampering, what do you mean?" Muscovito replies with irritation, "I mean tampering, opening it somewhere." George asks, "Well, where exactly?" Muscovito's irritation is rising. "Somewhere, anywhere. That's what I want you to tell me." George shakes his head. "I can't imagine that happening, sir. That kind of thing is very rare. But it's not unheard of. I can file a report if you like." Muscovito looks somewhat alarmed. "No, that's okay. Just wondering if it was possible." George replies, "Well, if you change your mind, I'll have it looked into. You let me know." Then he backed out of the driveway and exhaled with relief. As he drove away, he thought about this encounter and convinced himself that, in all likelihood, Muscovito would never suspect him. After 35 years, George knows he can rely on one common, immutable perception. Not that mailmen are honorable or above reproach, but that mailmen are stupid. Why else would you be just a mailman? George continues to deliver the mail through rain, snow, sleet, and hail, and at night he continues to tamper with Muscovito's mail. On a gray afternoon, George is delivering Muscovito's mail when the electric gate opens again. A voice comes from the speaker. "Can you come inside the gate for a minute? I have a package to go out that didn't fit in the box." George notices a little edge to the voice and once again imagines himself throwing the truck into reverse, hitting the accelerator, and disappearing into the world. But he doesn't, of course. Instead, he does what he knows how to do, what he's been doing for 35 years. He heads in to deliver and pick up the U.S. mail. Muscovito is standing in the same place in the driveway, again with his arms folded, this time with a thin smile. George gives a friendly nod. "Hello. Where's the package, sir?" Muscovito uncrosses his arms to reveal that he's holding a 9mm handgun. "Right here." He points it at George, the black muzzle only 2 feet from George's chest. Slamming into reverse is no longer an option. "Into the house," instructs Muscovito. George feels himself going dizzy. He blinks hard to keep from passing out. Then he steps gingerly out of the truck and walks up the steps and into the house. 2 men are sitting on a couch in the middle of the living room. Men several years younger than Muscovito, each of them holding a weapon. "Sit down, mailman," says the one with the slick back hair, gesturing to a chair opposite them. George sits. His brain is in a fog. He can barely process what's going on around him, and yet he feels hyper-alert to everything, like being a disembodied observer of your own fate, of your own approaching destiny. There is silence for a moment while the 2 men study him. Then the man with the slick back hair says, "It's illegal to tamper with the U.S. mail." The second man speaks up, the one with the shaved head. "You of all people should know that. You can be punished for something like that." George is silent. The first man continues. "Our partner, Muscovito, he didn't think a mailman could be doing this. Never even occurred to him. You're about to retire, aren't you, mailman? Aren't you, George, whose Maggie has died, who now knows our business inside and out? What are we going to do with you, George? What are we going to do?" George knows it's a rhetorical question. "Well, mailman, here's what we're going to do." Obedient, cooperative George can do nothing but watch as the man with the shaved head grimly, matter-of-factly checks his weapon, levels the gun, and fires a single shot. Professional, passionless, right where he aims it, right into the brain, right into Muscovito's forehead. George is paralyzed. He stopped breathing. He is panic and terror personified. The man with the shaved head immediately begins attending to Muscovito's body. He moves efficiently and solemnly, like a mortician. The man with slick back hair watches the proceedings while addressing George. He never fit into the neighborhood, did he, George? Built walls, gates, never even introduced himself to the neighbors. That's not how you make yourself welcome. That's not how you blend in, is it, George? You've got to make yourself part of the scenery. You garden, play some tennis, some golf. You host a party or two. Everyone knows that's how you fit in, right, George? The man stops watching the proceedings with Muscovito's corpse and looks directly at George. We knew it was you. We could tell. So we did some research, just like you did, George. And you have been utterly reliable, someone to count on through rain, snow, sleet, and hail. And now you've studied our businesses. I'm sure there's still plenty you don't understand, but we can teach you. You're about to retire. You live alone. And you're skilled in the subtleties of the mail services. You are ready for the next challenge in life, yes? So you are now our partner. And of course, you have no choice. If you refuse, Muscovito's murder will be tied to you. It would be easy. We'll soon take the videotape from Muscovito's security camera, which will clearly show your truck parked in his driveway at the time of death. The murder weapon will soon have your handprints on it, and will be sitting for all time in a post office box that you have already requested and paid for with cash. Muscovito's body is now wrapped in plastic sheeting and taped up, a package ready for transportation and disposal. The man with the shaved head looks up at George. We'll load it on the truck for you. We have instructions for where you will dump it. Don't worry. No one will see. But we'll take photos of you doing it for our own insurance. The man with the slick back hair jumps in. We'll have plenty of use for your skills and your knowledge, and we'll compensate you fairly. We'll be in touch. The man with the shaved head smiles. Welcome, mailman. Welcome to our neighborhood.